I'm really excited about today's interview. So I've got with me Bill Griffune, and the last name might sound familiar because it's my last name. I usually let agents introduce themselves, but in this case, my dad, he's a bit humble, and so I'll say, "That's all right, Dad. We can barely hear the phone in the background.
Okay.
It's there, but it's not the end of the world." So. So Bill started with Farmers Insurance. Was it in 1983, Dad? Is that right?
1981.
1981. So I shortchanged you a little bit, and so he ended up being the National Farmers Agent of the Year in 1992. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That is right.
So 1992, out of, I think at the time it was like 15,000 or 16,000 farmers agents.
Mm-hmm.
They ended up choosing my dad. So he was a really great example of somebody in insurance, and he ended up going independent. So we'll talk a little bit about why. Why would a successful farmer's agent make that jump? And so before we get to that point, Dad, I will turn the time over to you now and just kind of open the, better said, give you an open question. How did you get into insurance in the first place? Going back to 1981, what happened and why did you get into the industry?
Okay, so actually my insurance career began as a result of my growing family. Catherine and I began having children, and I was a musician in the Toledo Symphony Orchestra. Well, I played principal horn there for 10 years. Well, the thing about it is, that a symphony musician does not make a lot of money. It's a career that is very gratifying, but not particularly financially gratifying. So I had to make a change. I had to make a change from there in order to provide for my family. And it became known to a district manager in a congregation that I belonged to that I was looking for a career change, and he encouraged me to do an insurance career. Long story short, he was my mentor and was someone who showed me the way with regard to how to build an agency and so forth. I knew nothing about insurance at that point, and Farmers had a program that it was called the Career Program, and you could test the water for like a year. And so that's what I was doing, and I had the help of my district manager, Howard Nisley, who is, again, my mentor and someone to whom I am in a great debt of gratitude for his abilities and his instruction to me. So the point is, though, that's how my career started with Farmers Insurance. And I was with Farmers for 25 years.
25 years. And what's interesting about your background, which I learned isn't terribly unique to your background, is musicians, right? Turns out that musicians actually are pretty good at insurance because musicians are in the habit of practicing, right? That they practice and practice and practice. And so you get into not necessarily a process mindset, but I even remember, I've heard you tell stories about Howard, particularly when you were new in the business, that he was like exactly what you want a district manager to be. And you, being the kind of guy who would practice, you'd come home after a day of work, call him up and say, "Okay, Howard, I had these calls." Right? And you would just ask him, "How could I have done this better?" And he was really quite a good salesman, right?
Yes, very good.
Yeah, so he'd give you that feedback. All right, so let's talk. You started in 1981, totally different than today's ball game, right? Talk about Facebook marketing and sales funnels and creating a lot of automations and such for touch points. What was your marketing plan, and how did you grow your agency?
The marketing plan was really frankly, just to get in front of people. To get appointments was my primary objective. My goal was to write 4 policies a day. If I could do 4 policies a day, I figured I could succeed as an agent. A lot of times I was not able to make that, but I made it quite a bit. And so I got things going somewhat. But getting the appointments in those days was a matter of phone calls or personal visits. I guess there was relationships that existed, referrals and so forth, but mainly it was a question of cold calls. And so I made cold calls myself for a while. That was a kind of thing that I did not enjoy. So I hired a telemarketer. Her name was Joanne. She was disabled. She loved having an opportunity to do something with her time and was very good on the phone and made appointments for me. So I managed to work with her. And that experience, by the way, led to a lot of appointments where and in those days, I would go knock on the door for the appointment and make an in-home visit,
Yeah.
which is, that's a lot different than what we do today. But half the time when I would knock on the door, the person would say, I changed my mind, or I never did make the appointment. And so a lot of times there were just cancellations. And that's the thing about marketing. And one thing I would say with regard to experience in the insurance business is that marketing is probably the critical issue. To me, if a person is able to meet with people and have interviews and make that a consistent process, they can succeed. Without personal contact with people, without some kind of marketing program, really there's basically no hope, which explains why so many people try the insurance business and fail at it, because they are not able to have that consistent experience in sales interviews, in getting appointments. That is so unbelievably important. So let's see, and I think that relates to the question that you had asked about marketing and how I did it. Again, it was a lot different in those days, but what is similar is
Hmm.
that there is the fact that you must have appointments or interviews, sales opportunities. That is the key to success in our business. And frankly, it really doesn't matter if you've got a company like Farmers or if you've got a great big independent agency with all that uh, opportunity. The critical issue is whether or not you can get in front of people. And I don't know if that's what you had in mind for me to explain in terms of my experience, but I'll tell you what. And I was thinking about this as I thought about the fact that we were beginning together today to have this discussion. It was so ingrained in me that even today, when I see a plumber's van, I think, well, I should write the number down. There's the name and there's the number. I can write that business there. And it just stayed with me, and it's a constant thing. My mind was just driven to get with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the point of the question isn't so much to say like, oh, like what, you have, I guess here's the thing. You need to have a marketing plan. And I think we absolutely agree on that. If an agent is going to succeed, you have to be able to consistently get in front of prospects. Even if it is writing down the van's number and calling them and saying, hey, I saw you
Mhm.
guys out and working, you're in business. I want to help make sure you guys are covered. That's great. But part of it as well is I just wanted to get a feeling for how you made it work in your agency as well, to maybe spur some thought for other agents. And one
Yeah.
thing you did say that I find interesting is that agents, if they don't have a marketing plan, they're going to fail. So
Mhm.
if you go back to 1981, you're starting as an agency, you're probably nervous, I assume, because you have a family to take care of. At what point did you know insurance is for me? I'm going to make this work.
Well, that's a very good question. That probably took a couple of years because the growth experience I had was very slow, and there was some debt involved with it. And I'm not going to go into detail on that. Suffice it to say that I went in debt quite a bit of money, and my wonderful district manager Howard Nisley gave me confidence by giving me encouragement and saying, imagine you wanted to go in business yourself. What are your possibilities? Well, one would be a McDonald's franchise, or maybe you buy a bunch of apartments and you become a building manager, or you rental income and that kind of thing. But he said, no matter how you look at that, look at the amount of money you would go in debt. At that time, a McDonald's franchise was $500,000. And
Yeah.
I didn't go anywhere near $500,000 in debt, but I went in debt quite a bit, and that sustained that anxiety of whether or not I would be able to succeed for a number of years for me. Okay, and then finally, I when I thought I could succeed is when I began having uh, opportunities in commercial insurance, and I had had an established personal lines book of business itself, so there was a little bit of money coming in for that to sustain me. And so, when I thought I could really succeed, actually, to be perfectly honest with you, even in 1991, when I was agent of the year, I was not particularly well to do. Hang on, I'm sorry.
No problem. We'll let it
I
slide.
should have turned that off. Okay, that's done. All right. So, but anyhow, in 1991, I was Agent of the Year. And when I went to President's Council those years, I have to believe I was probably the least successful in terms of income. If you derive success or you equate success with how much money you're making, I was way down the totem pole at President's Council. But there were things that I was doing that the company really liked, and they liked. I think I was chosen really as someone whose image they wanted to be the Agent of the Year. I was always profitable. I wrote all lines of business, and so I was very popular with Farmers Insurance. And but as far as when did I know that I could succeed? It was a long time before that happened for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's maybe like one of the differences between you and me. I don't know if I could have held on for honestly 2 years. I think I could do it, but like 4, 5 years where you're thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make this work. At some point I would eat the humble pie and I would have bailed. And so
Yeah.
I tip my hat to you on that. All right. So we're going to go ahead. We're just going to skip right over the National Agent of the Year, right? So pretty much the 90s. I mean, you were going to, we can acknowledge you were going to President's Council, you were going to Toppers Club, right? You were hitting all the awards with Farmers. So to set the stage, things are going pretty well with Farmers, right? I mean, it's not like, you continued a pretty good relationship with them. You're growing an agency. My oldest brother, Fritz, he comes back. He starts Farmers Agency as well in the same office, but his own book of business. So could you take us to kind of the next step? At what point did you know Farmers isn't my future anymore?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, and it actually was the result of Fritz coming into business with me. And by the way, Fritz was very successful and grew the agency substantially when he came aboard, and paved the way for you and Hans, because you could see, well, gosh, Fritz did this and he was
That's true.
successful. He could do it. So there was that experience that we had together, and where it became clear to me that this was not something, not only that I didn't want for myself, but if I knew after the years of experience that I'd had what I knew then, and I have these family members coming into the business, what would I do if I were them, if they knew what I knew now? And I knew it was not to be a direct appointed agent like a Farmers type model. I knew that was not what I wanted for my kids. So that started happening in my mind, and thinking about, okay, look at the things that we've experienced with Farmers. They're with a single bullet carrier. One is totally dependent on marketing strategies of the carrier, which are completely different from your own personal marketing strategies. Like, for example, Farmers said, we're going into commercial insurance and we're going to write auto dealerships. Okay, used and new cars. So I thought, well, wow, that's a big market. I can learn that. And I did learn it, and I had some great help with that. And I went out, and for about, I'm going to say 3 years, I built a significant book of auto dealerships and auto repair. At Christmas time, and I can't remember what year it was, they had a meeting down in Columbus. That's where the office was for Farmers Insurance at that time. So I drove down to Columbus at Christmas time, and they rolled out or introduced us to the fact that they were getting out of the automotive. They're not going to do that anymore. Now that was a huge setback for me, huge, and very, very frustrating. And so then, and it's not like I could place it anywhere else, because my only other option was E&S, which, if you're a Farmer's agent and you can't write it with Farmers, you can do it in E&S in those days. That's the way it was. That's the way the contract read. And so, but I couldn't do that to my clients. So when the renewals came up, I gave them plenty of advance notice, saying, hey, look, I'm not going to be able to renew this policy with Farmers, and I don't have a competitive market for you. So and there went all that business. And because I could probably have sold them on ENS, but I didn't want to do it because I knew it wasn't the best for them. And
Yeah.
so that's one example of a kind of thing. And the second thing that happened, which was the veritable straw that broke the camel's back, was farmers came out with Farmers Financial Solutions investments. And I thought, okay, I can learn this. And we did. And Fritz was with me on this. And we grew a book of 401k plans and started making some pretty good money at that. 401k plans are compensated in a particular way with the model. There's the FFS, the company that has the payment model and all that kind of thing. Well, they changed the model and they took out the retirement share for for the basis of payment. So we went from an 80% payout down to a 55% payout overnight, a huge setback. So now I didn't explain that story very well, other than to say that overnight things changed and dramatically impacted our income. So at that point, I determined, okay, this is enough. I'm looking now for a change. That plus the fact that I got kids coming into the business and I want to make it better for them as well.
Yeah. Well, and even hearing those stories, like it breaks my heart.
Oh,
It's
that was
terrible.
hard.
Well,
That was hard.
and the idea with independence, like when you have an independent agency, generally speaking, when you have a carrier that gets into I mean, don't get me wrong, carriers change their appetites. It happens, right? I mean, like what was it? CNA years ago used to do contractors, and then they just completely got out of contractors, right? I mean, it happens. But the benefit of being independent is that generally speaking, when a company has a niche, they're really good at that niche. I think of companies like NSI, right? Or of course, NSI does a bunch of that type of business, you know, events and daycares and such. But like they don't change the appetites as frequently as farmers did. And if somebody does change their appetite, you can take it somewhere else and say, well, that really stinks. I got
Right.
some work here. But like in your case, instead of just you were telling people, well, there's the door, you know, you can go check out somebody over there. Yeah, at least
Right.
with an independent, you can say, hey, look, this company's getting out, but I can still help you, which of course is such a blessing. All right. So you decide to go independent and you know, and hopefully change things not just for yourself, but it kind of sounds like you're the trailblazer for, you know, Fritz and probably Hans and me, right? And Hans and I hadn't
Somewhat.
officially decided that
Yeah.
we were going into insurance yet, but kind of seeing the writing on the wall, you thought let's go ahead and do this. Let's go independent. So how did you like? Could you go through the experience of getting carrier appointments? Like,
Okay.
where did you start?
Sure.
Who'd you get?
So
How was that process?
coincidentally, not long after Farmers Financial Services changed their payment structure, a friend of mine came to me and said, hey, how would you like to start an agency with me, an independent agency? And so that was just coincidental. And sometimes things just work out that way. And, it was something actually we had discussed it before, but that was just the time. The time was just right. And it was interesting that when that opportunity was brought to me, that Fritz just happened to be sitting with me, and he asked, well, might I be a part of this independent agency also? So that was another wonderful coincidence, and it was agreed that yes, Fritz would be a strength to the starting of a new independent agency. So now getting appointments was for us, that now we're coming from captive going to independent. And so when we would talk to carriers, they want to see a track record. They want to see, and we had the track record, but they would say, well, wait a minute, you're coming from a direct market, a farmer's agent, how are you going to do this? And so getting those appointments was a little bit of a difficulty in that regard. However, I did know the underwriter, and she was influential in Travelers Insurance. And so with that relationship that I had, and I had actually quite a bit of credibility with the people with whom I worked. Actually, this person that I knew had experience with farmers insurance, so she knew my experience with farmers, and we had mutual respect.
Yeah.
So when I came to her and said, well, I'd like to start an independent carrier. I resigned from farmers. I'm going to start from scratch. And I've got some partners that are going to be with me. We think we can make this work. And she said, okay. And then one of my partners at that point, also had a relationship. So we had two carriers to start. And what's remarkable about that is with those two carriers already, my closing ratio increased substantially. I was able to close much more business. And I was still marketing and driving and getting appointments and meeting with people and doing commercial appointments and all of that. So I was just doing it with a couple of carriers, and then we would add carriers as we got a little bit of momentum going. And so getting the carriers was more a function of the relationships that I already had. See, I was in the business 25 years, and I was known in a way. And I knew a lot of people, and we had favorable relationships. I like people, and so I get along with people. I try to, and I enjoy the relationships that I've developed over the years. And so, nevertheless, I mean, there were still the anxieties that went with, well, how because it's not like there weren't requirements. They just weren't as heavy a demand as I think if an agent wants to just go out and get an appointment on their own and they're not as experienced as I was, they probably have a lot more difficulty than I had getting those first few. Once we had a few carriers under our belt and some momentum going, we had track records with independent carriers. Well, then we started with, I mean, it's still like it was not easy to get those appointments. We had to go, sometimes it would be 5 interviews with first of all, it would be the carrier rep, well, okay, you talk to the carrier rep. Then the carrier says, well, come and meet my manager. And then that manager says, well, come and meet this person. We're going to have you into the office. We want to meet you. We want to get to know you. And so there was all of that. And so those appointments were not exactly easy to get. And they were, and then the anxiety that accompanied that was, well, okay, we had at that point, the carriers would say, we need $100,000 production from you right out the door. I mean, that was just part of it.
And that was even with, at this point, you had a track record, right? Now you've had Salina and Travelers, you had the data, and even with that, carriers would say, we'll appoint you, but there is going to be a pretty strict production.
Well, they would say, for example, what carriers do you have now? And what's your book look like? How all of this analysis that goes on, because they want to be sure that, okay, are we a fit for this group of carriers that you've already got, or are we just going to be ancillary? Can we be a part of you, or are you just going to, are you not really going to grow with us?
Mm-hmm.
So that was a concern, and those concerns, by the way, we did have some, I guess you could say, anxiety over that in being able to manage those carrier relationships.
Oh yeah, I believe it. Because you've got, I mean, honestly, with every carrier you add, because it sounds like Salina and Travelers that you and your partner you had the relationship, right? So there was probably a production requirement there, but it was for them. It was like, hey, let's just grow, right? It's the two of us. We can do this. For every carrier you add, I suspect, like you mentioned, the new carriers, they don't want to be like a value add, right? They want to be a significant part. What's also difficult is then you put the existing relationships under a strain, right? Where they could say, hey, look, we helped you get off the ground, and now you're adding 4 more carriers.
Yeah.
Are we still going to get ours?
Right.
There is a really fine balance there. When you go and get it on your own.
Definitely a balancing act, and an important one.
Yeah, definitely. But you mentioned that your closing ratio increased, right? Were there any other benefits, any other results of going independent? Like, were you able to market to different business segments you'd never done? Was there any sort of personal satisfaction, right? Even though you were anxious about starting an independent agency, were you actually less stressed, or were you more stressed than you were as a farmer's agent, right? All of that. Like, what other results did you see as you went independent?
Well, I guess I am a person that, puts I impose a certain amount of stress on myself just to grow. I just want to keep growing. You know, I want to do better than I'm doing now. So there was always that desire and that intent to grow the agency. And when you say what it was a happier time because I did have way more markets. As a matter of fact, let's just use NSI as an example.
Okay.
NSI did things now, particularly when they came aboard, and they were, now there are a number of carriers that do have a little bit more of a niche market like NSI. But NSI still does a really good job with what they do. But the
Yeah.
point is that all of a sudden, daycare, which was not available to me before that, and the kinds of things that NSI did, and I can't think of all the markets that we have with NSI right now, right off the top of my head, but there were a number of new things that were less sought after by the large number of agents that are out there. So there were fewer people after that particular type of business, and so they were more receptive. It was easier to get appointments. I guess maybe that's the key. It was easier to get more appointments because I had so much more opportunity.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay, that totally makes sense. That is, you like get your bearing straight as an independent. You start growing and you see what other
Mhm.
markets there are. You can add people to the lineup, keep them all happy, right?
Yeah, and
Especially in commercial.
I do want to say one thing also about the experience that I had during the course of my career, and this might relate or resonate with some, and that is that I listened actually back in the day. I listened to Zig Ziglar, let's see, and motivational speakers on tape, and I had cassette tape in my car, and I had those things going all the time. I read books. Started with let's see, what is the one? How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie. That's still a fundamental, starting place for getting people skills. And so I made a point of watching for good books and always trying to improve how to say things, how to think, what opportunities might develop as a result of how to ask questions, and all those kinds of things that are really part of our toolbox. It's like when I was a musician, we had etude books and things that you would practice, So I'd have all these etude books, and they would make playing the music easier because there were patterns in those etudes that sometimes were intended to be difficult. But so you would learn from the etudes. Well, I learned from the books, kind of like in that same kind of thing, that it was a way to develop the ability to do what I did and try and improve myself through all these other opportunities that are found in books. When I was dealing with agents with Firefly as we grew, one of the things I would say is I can save you about 25 years. I can give you some things that took me 25 years to learn. And you can have them out the gate. Now you can take them or leave them, but you can have them, and I'm eager to share them with you. So anyhow, there's that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and thank you very much. That was a really great answer. All right, so now you have 25 years of experience as a farmer's agent. You learned a ton of other things. There's a question I wanted to ask, that if you could talk to an agent who is contemplating starting their own independent agency, what advice would you give them?
I think I would give them the same advice that I would give to the number of agents with farmers that were sent to me as to whether or not they wanted to develop a career in insurance. It's a little bit different a question, but the answer is the same, and that is you just have to be able to get appointments. That's really the beauty of it, is that appointments are difficult to get. And that is a two-edged sword. The painful side of it is that it's something that has to be done constantly, and it's difficult. The
Yep.
beauty of it is that it's not any easier for anyone else. It's hard for everyone, and that's the beauty of it, because that protects, once you started building a book of business, it's kind of like being an incumbent politician, and you can be there for 50 years or more if you're Nancy Pelosi. I mean, you can be there for years and years and years. And I'm not just saying Nancy, there's a lot of them that are just there for years and years because they just keep getting reelected. Well, your renewals keep happening, and you really almost have to do something wrong, or the carrier has to be crazy to raise rates to a point where people are just going to bail out. And that does happen, but with an independent agency, you can roll with that punch, and you can maintain your agency a lot better. So I don't know, did that answer? Yeah, marketing. I guess if it were a brand new agent or someone with a lot of experience, and actually the person with a lot of experience is going to be nodding their head right now saying, that's exactly right. You got to have appointments. You have to be growing that agency.
Definitely. Well, even like to your point, it doesn't matter. Like being independent helps your closing ratio and can help you have more success. But the reality is, I mean, there was a guy who just reached out to me over LinkedIn. He probably blasted a bunch of people, but he was like, "Hey, I've got a $7 million Allstate book here." It's like, well, some guy out there grew a book to $7 million with Allstate. And how? By setting a ton of appointments. Even if its closing ratio is only 10%, you can get there as long as you just have a ton of appointments.
Right.
And so making the jump to independent, again, your closing rate will go up. But the key is you've got to be having a ton of appointments. The Allstate agent who has 200 appointments a month is going to be way more successful than the independent guy who only has 5. Right? Absolutely. I mean, it's so that is really at the crux of everything. Well, I don't have any other questions for you, Dad. I did just want to pass on 2 very kind comments. Brandon Bergana said, "Bill is a man of knowledge. I'm very fortunate to have been able to learn from him." So Brandon has a very nice thing to say. And then Alex Stewart, he said, "I want to say thank you for giving people like us an avenue to be independent and have the amount of support that we do. Not sure I would have gone independent if it wasn't for the Firefly model."
Wow.
And Alex is doing great. He's a newer agent. I don't know if you've even had a chance to talk to him, Dad, but he's doing great. So
I miss the opportunities I had, like Brandon Bergana. We had times together and it was fun. And other agents that I had an opportunity to interact with. Like I say, I love people and I just enjoyed interactions with them.
Definitely. Well, so at any rate, thank you so much, Dad. Thanks, everybody. Take care.